you've been following my riveting training series, you'll know that I was preparing for a powerlifting meet at the end of July. And if you look at the date, you'll realize that I'm very behind on videos. So what I'd like to do here is just go over the entire prep for that powerlifting meet and talk about how I feel that the prep went, how the meet went, and why, despite many recommendations, I've still not given up on powerlifting. So as a bit of a background, I did my first powerlifting meet in 2011. At the time, a lot of natural bodybuilders were competing in powerlifting. A lot of us thought that if we ran these strength cycles, that it would transfer into more productive hypertrophy training when we went back to the more traditional bodybuilding type of training. So a lot of us were competing in bodybuilding and powerlifting at the time and thinking that that periodization actually made a lot of sense. It turns out that it probably doesn't. And when most people go and do the smarter thing, I usually just continue to do the thing that I've been doing, and I'll do that usually for multiple decades. Now, unfortunately, this is in 2011 before cameras were invented, so I don't have any videos to show you, but I do have this picture of me backstage at a bodybuilding show where apparently none of my friends and family were around. My first meet went not so well, but it was a good experience. I think like most people, the first meet they do, they have no idea what the hell is going on. And that's essentially what happened to me. I almost bombed out on my squat, but ended up finishing with 440, and that's not 440 kilos. And on the bench, I think I dropped 300 pounds directly on my chest, deadlifted 500 pounds, and also incurred a pelvic floor injury. Fast forward to the fall of 2021, where I did my last powerlifting meet before my 2022 bodybuilding season. And that meet went pretty well. I squatted 600 pounds. I wasn't super happy with the depth on it. I felt that they were being somewhat generous with giving me the white lights on that one. I ended up benching 381. And deadlifting 678. So it was a good end to the off season and a nice increase from when I started in 2011 when I was 7 years old. Fun / disturbing fact, I've been using the same shoes and singlet the entire time that I've been competing. To every meet that I've ever done, I've worn the same ones. So after reaching about a low of 193 pounds from a starting weight of around 240, my testosterone was 26 and I could barely deadlift 500 pounds. So I had a little bit of rebuilding to do, and that's typically the case after a bodybuilding season for me. It usually takes me literally 2 years until I get my strength to relatively back to where it was prior to the bodybuilding season. This off season so far has been kind of a mess, honestly, especially leading up to the powerlifting meet. I had a lot of personal stuff going on during this off season, had some airway issues that have been impacting my sleep pretty significantly. My cat ran away and then I had to move. So there's just been a lot of things that have been impeding training and just making it difficult for me to train the way that I want to train, especially as it pertains to the power lifts. Also had just a few little nagging injuries that I had to work around. So all that to say that the power lifts had definitely not been going the way that I had imagined at this point in the off season. But hey, what's the fun of this stuff if everything goes smoothly, right? So we're gonna go over the program, exactly what I was doing leading up to the meets, what things were working, what things I feel didn't work well, and then the outcome of the meet itself. So one of the biggest issues that I had this off season was with my squat, at least early on in the off season. I've had this recurring, I'll call it a quad strain issue for many years. It usually comes from me getting too excited going into the off season right after a bodybuilding show, and I just start doing way more quad volume than I can handle. I also tend to start messing around with some more extreme positions with the loading, and this is almost always what happens. And coupling that with just some emotional stress and fatigue, this is a recipe for my quads just feeling like it's going to explode every time that I load it. So I had that going on for about a year in this off season. So it made squatting really difficult. I had to work around it in a lot of ways for a lot of the off season, but oftentimes I find with this stuff that injuries can be such an amazing teacher and such a great tool for having to be a little bit more innovative and learn some things with training. And I think ultimately it's actually a really good teaching tool because you don't have any other choice. You can't just keep doing the same shit you've been doing forever. So one of the strategies that I tend to use during these periods of time is BFR training, blood flow restriction training. Just a really, really nice way to get to essentially a similar or the same stimulus for hypertrophy with really light loads. I also think that there's some benefit there, just it being so extreme in terms of the restriction of blood flow and how much pooling of blood you get at the local level, that I would not be surprised if there's something just a little bit distinct about that stimulus that leads to a little bit more angiogenesis and capillarization, where we're just seeing more blood vessel and capillary formation at the local level. I can't see that not happening. And if you've never done BFR training before, it is just an incredibly different feeling than anything else that you'll do in the gym. It's really nasty, and I would encourage anyone, even if they don't have any type of injury, to just experiment with it a little bit, just so you can know what that pain feels like, because I think there's a nice carryover there from that type of training into normal training. Another strategy that I used in the off season was these crazy triphasic split squats. This is coming from Cal Dietz. It's me probably butchering his ideas completely, but from reading his text and watching some of his videos, this is what I came up with. And the idea here is you are using a floating heel on both feet. The weight is mostly loaded on that front leg, but keeping that heel off the ground on the front leg, which is something that looked crazy to me the first time that I saw it, but after trying it, found that it actually felt amazing on my quads, and in particular, the really slow eccentric. So just getting into that position, loading that front leg, and then just dropping into that 6-second eccentric for the first phase of the program, and then doing isometrics for the second phase, and then just doing full reps. By the time I got done with the 6-week block of that, my quads were actually feeling really good in using that in combination with the blood flow restriction training. And I also found that my squat strength was very well maintained during that phase without doing any back squatting. So that was a really cool experiment, something that I probably would not have tried otherwise, and turned out to be something that seemed to be pretty helpful. At the very least, it was just really fun. Putting that super heavy weight on your back on the split squats, it just feels kind of badass. Honestly, I got up to close to 500 pounds at the end of the phase, which according to Cal Dietz makes me about as strong as most of his like 140 pound females. I also had for the first time ever a pec strain, which was really wild. As things were really building up with my bench press, I went down for a 365, got a nice pause, and just felt a pink in my pec, and I was still able to press it up and not die, but I left it there for the day. I was able to still keep pressing for weeks after that. I had to take a little bit of time away from it, just alter the training a little bit, and seemed to be okay. Was able to heal up from that mostly, and as we'll talk about later, it came back to bite me in the ass later. But I was able to work around that using lots of, again, very slow eccentrics, lots of isometrics. These things tend to be really helpful, especially for any type of tendinous stuff. These are things that seem to work really well in most settings. So I utilized a lot of those strategies to kind of rehab from that and be able to keep pushing forward. As far as goals for this meet, every meet that I do, I'm always just trying to do a little bit better than I did at the last meet. I'm not trying to blow anything out of the water. And what I really wanted to do in this off season, maybe not necessarily at this meet, was to hit a 1,700 pound total and a 700 pound deadlift. Those are the two big goals that I have. And that isn't too much of a stretch from what I finished off with in the last meet in 2021. But as we know, as we progress in anything, the amount of change that you're going to see is going to be diminishing. So even though that 22 pounds on a deadlift doesn't sound like a lot, towards the end of a career, which I'm likely getting towards, that is a pretty significant amount. So going into this meet, by the time I got to my 6-week out prep, I knew I wasn't going to hit either one of those numbers. Really, the goal just became, okay, let's get to this meet. Let's just survive this prep. Let's see if we can get a few extra kilos on the bar compared to the last meet, and just remember what it's like to compete again. So I really like to keep the training cycles immediately prior to a meet as consistent as possible over the career of a lifter. Of course, if we're doing something that just doesn't work at all, then we're going to change it. But even then, we're going to make minor adjustments. But I like to have something that is predictable, that we can reference, and just tends to provide conservative results. So as far as the structure for this meet, I used, again, something that I've used many times and that I use with a lot of lifters. I have 2 accessory kind of supportive days where we're doing mostly hypertrophy work, essentially, just keeping that stimulus in. I think that's really helpful for just providing some different loading patterns. I think when you start getting into really specific powerlifting training, a lot of the stuff starts to look the same. It's a lot of loading with a lot of the same repetitive patterns. So I think just having some other movements in there is really helpful, alongside the fact that it's going to just support the tissue that you have, and that tissue is going to help you to move some load. So we definitely don't want to be losing muscle during a powerlifting prep. Don't need a lot of this volume. I tend to cut back my volume pretty significantly during these phases, but there's still plenty of hypertrophy work in there. I also just find that it makes my body feel really good subjectively, and I think that that's really important. A lot of times if I have any kind of, I don't know, back discomfort or hip stuff going on after some of the big powerlifting sessions, I usually am able to work most of that out and feel pretty good going into the next competition lift session. So I usually have 2 of those hypertrophy kind of oriented sessions, and then have 2 more powerlifting specific sessions. The first session being a more supportive lift structure, where I'm doing things like a beltless squat. So very close to the specific belted squat, but just different enough. That's a slightly different stimulus, and I don't have to use quite as much load. I'd still get a very similar effect. I'll do something like a 2 count pause instead of a competition pause bench press, and a beltless deadlift. So nothing fancy there, just basically a 2 time a week frequency for the power lifts, and then just having some supportive hypertrophy work alongside that. In addition to that, I had 1 structured cardio session, which was just some 5-minute repeats on the Echo bike at around an 8 RPE. So nothing super crazy, but enough to touch some higher heart rates and some higher work outputs. And then I cycle that into a circuit of just some other kind of random motions that, again, just train things a little bit differently, introducing some rotation. I think throughout the week, when you're doing a program that's gonna really lock you into extension pretty significantly with the big power lifts, I just find subjectively, again, it's helpful, and it seems to make people feel pretty good. I don't see any downside to doing that, so I'll usually work some type of circuit in there like that. And then on the 6th day of the week, that's an unstructured cardio session. So I'm either gonna do just some very easy light work on the Echo bike, or go out and skateboard, which I know sounds ridiculous, but that's something that I like to do because I don't want to be an adult yet. Even though obviously powerlifting only requires 1 rep, that isn't traditionally something you would consider to be a highly aerobic cardiorespiratory type of activity. You are still going to utilize the aerobic system when you are recovering in between sets and when you're recovering between workouts. So you don't want to completely let that drop off. And also, just from a health perspective, there's a lot of reasons to keep some cardiovascular training in there. So I always have a little bit of that in a powerlifting program. And again, it also just helps with recovery, it seems to, subjectively at least. And there's good reason to think that that's a good idea overall. So on the SPD supported day, where I've got the beltless work and the long pause bench press, I'm working a progression where I'm just working up to a 8, which really means a 9 RPE for a set of 3 on the squat, and 5s on the bench and the deadlift. The reason I'm not doing 5s on the squat is because I just can't seem to hold a low bar position for that long. And that's something that I've figured out over time. It's just better for me to not do that, because I end up just destroying my wrists and my elbows trying to hold that low bar position. Each week, basically just trying to go a little bit heavier than I did the previous week, assuming that the previous week went well. And then on week 4 and 5, just reducing everything by 1 rep. So very simple linear progression there, and just working up the absolute intensity. Then I have the main SBD day, which is competition standard everything. So throwing on the knee sleeves, throwing on the belts on the squat, doing a competition style pause on the bench press, and a belted deadlift with a full reset on each rep. And this is the big day of the week, working up to, again, an 8 to 9 RPE for sets of 3 for the first 3 weeks, and then dropping down to sets of 2 for weeks 4 and 5. And again, just trying to increase that loading slowly as long as I'm able to. And for the most part, I was able to follow a nice progression with both of these days, and again, able to reference it from my previous powerlifting prep down in 2021. And I was actually really on track. I was a little ahead of pace, even more so than I had planned to be, especially on the supportive SBD day, where my squat was about 15 pounds above where it was at the previous prep, and my deadlift was about 10 pounds above. So I was really starting to believe that things were going to come together in week 5 on the squat and the deadlift. I was hoping at that point that those 2 lifts were going to carry me through, because on week 4, I strained my pec again on the bench press. This is the last set, the last rep of the day, of course, and I don't even really know what happened. I just felt a little pop, luckily not towards the attachment on the humerus, is more just like the belly of the muscle, which was a good thing in my mind. I didn't feel like it was anything tendinous, because the tendinous stuff tends to take way longer to heal. But it just got a little muscle belly strain. I think I was just a little bit out of position maybe. And I think really I was just pushing things a little bit too far in general. As I mentioned in the last video, I had been playing around with this incline bench variation, and I could feel every time that I did it that I was just pushing a little bit too far in terms of the range of motion. And a lot of times it was carrying over into my main bench press day, because I would typically be 2 days later. And this particular week, I actually had to bump up my SBD day by 1 day. So I had 1 less day of recovery in between the incline press and my bench press. And I think that was just kind of the perfect storm of shit. And I just couldn't get through that workout without having something happen. I was feeling like I was going to not even be able to do the meet at this point, but because things were looking really good from a squat and deadlift perspective, finally, I was thinking I'm not going to cancel the meet. I actually started writing out the email to the promoter about 2 weeks out that I just, my pec just exploded. My life is over. I'm gonna have to sell my house and all my belongings. But I decided to wait. It seemed a little bit premature for all of that. And I thought, all right, let's just see if we can rehab this thing. For this cycle, you can see the squat was going pretty well. I had 1 day where I missed one of my reps. That 555, I missed the 3rd rep, but by the end of the cycle, things were looking really nice. I know that this particular algorithm does not fit perfectly for me. That 634 is certainly not going to happen. That was my projected 1 rep max. I wouldn't even think of attempting that, but at least the trend was going nicely. Same thing for the bench, at least initially in this cycle, things were looking really good. And then I had that little strain, but was able to start picking back up again after a couple of weeks of rehabbing, and right before the meet, feeling pretty good about some of the singles that I was hitting. And then the deadlift, kind of stable throughout because I was able to go up in load, as you can see, but the RPE was just going up and up. And so the projected 1 rep max, not really moving a ton through that, but still around what I was hoping to hit. Of course, things did not go as planned. So for peak week, I run a pretty aggressive and unconventional protocol. And this is something that I've run with many lifters. I've done this for almost every meet that I've ever done. And it helps for me and for a lot of lifters just to feel that there's no gap in terms of the feeling that heavy load on the bar. Anytime that I've done a traditional taper, I always feel terrible at the meet, and I always perform terribly at the meet. Everything just feels super heavy on my back. It feels like it's been weeks, because it has been since I've had anything really heavy on my back, and it just doesn't go well for me. So I run a protocol where I do, on day 1, which was Saturday, a set of 5 on the supportive SBD day. So this is just a set of 5 on the bench and the deadlift, and a set of 3 on the squat, because again, I can't do 5s on my squat. And these are all beltless, but with sleeves on the squat. So this day went really well. We felt very happy with the numbers on this day. My squat depth, I was maybe a little bit borderline, but I felt good about everything here. These were all PRs, with the exception of the bench, because I did not follow the protocol because my pec was still feeling a little funky. So I instead just hit a single, which felt good, no pain, moved just fine. So I was feeling really good after this Saturday and excited to go into the rest of the week. The next day was just a reduction in volume on the hypertrophy day, reduction in load. So more of a traditional taper, just enough to get some blood flow going and not beat myself up too much. Then day 3 is the big main lift day, and that was on Wednesday. And so this day, belted up, competition standard on everything. And my squat, again, went really well. I felt really happy with that. My bench, I was able to hit a 375 for a nice pause single, and I felt really good. At that point, I decided I am going to do the meet, because going into this week in that day, I actually hadn't even decided for sure if I was going to do the meet. It really was going to come down to how that bench press went. Things went really well there. And then the deadlift, the fucking deadlift. So finally, just starting to feel confident and good with deadlifts. I was coming out of that Saturday lift with a lot of confidence, feeling really good. And I think that's the benefit to this type of protocol. But the downside to this type of protocol is that if you overshoot, you're usually gonna fuck yourself pretty hard. And that's exactly what happened. That 3rd rep I knew was gonna be a stretch, but I was hoping that just tapering off some of the volume, already having a ton of exposure to these big, long powerlifting workouts, just taking out a bunch of sets and only doing 1 set, even though it's a hard set, by that time, after doing 6 weeks of that type of training, it's really not that big of a deal. It just feels like a really easy day. And that's typically how I feel going into this main lift on the peaking week, is that by the time I get there, I'm usually feeling really good, and the lifts move exactly how I want them to. So as you can see here, I ended up missing that 3rd rep, which probably wouldn't have been a big deal had I just dropped the damn weight. If I just, after the 2nd rep, just taken 2 reps on that and just walked away, it probably wouldn't have come back to bite me in the ass on the meet day. But, as expected, I had to go for it. I had enough sense not to completely hitch it and get it up. I could have just hitched the shit out of it and gotten it up. And of course you can't do that in a powerlifting meet. So why the hell would you do it in your garage leading up to a meet? So I at least had the sense to put it down, but I definitely followed with it for just a little bit too long. And that proved to be a little bit of a mistake. So going into meet day, I had a 4 a.m. wake up to get on the road by around 4:30 to make it into Houston for the weigh-ins and all the equipment check, everything nice and early, which I think was actually perfect for me. I usually lift in the afternoons, so I wanted to at least be awake for a while before I got under the bar. And by the time I did, I was feeling really good. Squats were moving really well. I definitely warmed up about 40 minutes too early. Again, like I mentioned before, it's a whole skill when you're handling yourself or handling another lifter at a meet, and just kind of remembering how the whole thing goes. When I'm coaching myself, I almost always mess this up and warm up way too early. I actually warmed up to my top warm up and then realized I had about half an hour until I was going to be on. So I went back down, did another single. That's the first time I've ever done that before. Just getting that first squat out of the way, this first squat jitters didn't move great, but I didn't think that it would with the whole warm up fiasco thing. So I was able to get through that nicely and felt good to put in the next attempt at 595. that one moved really well as well. I was pretty happy with how that moved. And I decided to go up to 617, which I knew was gonna be a little bit of a stretch, but I wanted to just go for it.
Come on, run. What?
Like I mentioned at the last meet, I felt like they were being somewhat generous with giving me that 600-pound squat. So I wanted to make sure that there was no doubt in anybody's mind, and especially mine, that I was going to get this lift. Moving into the bench, things were feeling really good. Didn't have any pec discomfort, any weirdness through all of the warm-ups. First two attempts moved pretty well. I felt good after that second one, so I decided to go for 386. I want to keep it a little bit conservative. I felt that I definitely could have done like a 392, somewhere around there, but I wanted to just stay conservative, just take the win. That would be a meet PR for me. And I felt very confident that I was going to get that lift. And then probably the most devastating thing that's ever happened to me on a bench press. My fucking foot slipped. And this is a direct result of me being incredibly frugal. As I mentioned before, that I've had the same shoes for all of the meets that I've ever done. These are my only squat shoes that I've ever had. There's zero tread on these shoes. So when I started to really drive with my legs, my foot literally just slipped. It was just kind of a free thing. I definitely had the strength. I started to change position a little bit. It was going to be a harder lift than I had anticipated it being. And because I started to change position, that's part of the reason why my foot slipped. But the main thing was just that I didn't have enough tread on my shoes and I need to get new ones. Have I bought new shoes yet? No, I have not. So after sulking for a few minutes and feeling sorry for myself, I was able to put the bench press behind me and get ready for the deadlift. And the warm-ups on the deadlift were honestly the best feeling deadlifts that I've had this entire offseason. And I was even starting to get ahead of myself a little bit, thinking that, oh my God, maybe I'll pull 700 pounds today. Like this could potentially happen. And what I found out is that by the time I got to the platform, I was still pretty fatigued from that pull on Wednesday. It's been an interesting offseason in that respect, where I've definitely noticed that there is more time for recovery nowadays for me. And I'm not going to say it has anything to do with age, because it doesn't. All right. That's not a thing. It's probably a thing. That's probably exactly what's going on. But I just think I've been carrying a lot of fatigue in general. And I just don't seem to recover as quickly from something that is like really neurally demanding, like a deadlift. If I have a really hard pull a few days prior or even a week prior, it just seems to stick with me longer than it used to. Maybe it's because the absolute loads are a little heavier than they used to be. I don't really know exactly what's going on there, but it definitely came back and got me at the meet. So that first deadlift, man, felt way heavy on the platform, way heavier than I expected it to. And the second one is something that I pulled multiple times before. It came up just fine, but it was definitely not a big confidence builder. So because the bench press went as poorly as it did, I thought to myself, what the hell, just go for it. Probably not gonna get it, but let's put 689 on the bar and let's just see what happens. I could have gone the conservative route. I could have pulled what I pulled at my previous meet, which was 678. I'm very confident that I would have gotten that, but I wanted to do something that I hadn't done before. And if I was gonna miss it, I didn't want to miss it by only 2.5 kilos. That's how my brain works. So I went up, I took an aggressive jump and just figured I'd just give it whatever I could give it. And it turns out it wasn't very much. So kind of a bummer on that overall. The beats started off really well. I was really pumped about that squat, and then just felt a little bit defeated after the bench press, but really just being a bad decision on the deadlift. But I was okay with the decision. I felt that that's what I wanted to do that day. I'm not like a very competitive powerlifter at this point. Powerlifting has gotten absolutely insane. If this was 15 years ago, then maybe I would be somewhat competitive. But at this point, there are multiple teenagers that weigh 80 pounds less than me that are getting better totals than I am at this point. So this really isn't for me about being competitive. I don't really care what anyone else at the meet does. I want everyone to do super well. I want people to do better than me. I want everyone to just enjoy the sport. And that's where I'm at right now. And that's why I continue to do it, honestly. One thing that really sucks about bodybuilding and hypertrophy training in general is that we just can't measure it. And the only real way that I have of knowing that I've done better from a bodybuilding perspective is I have to diet myself to near death after 4 years of off-season training, put on a bunch of weird goopy tan crap, shave my whole body, stand on stage in my underwear, and then somebody hopefully tells me that I'm beautiful. It's a really long process, which I do like for a different reason. I think it's cool to just chip away at something without even being able to see it in the future in any way. Not having it something tangible to hold on to is kind of cool to see if you can just continue to pursue a goal like that. I do like that, but it also is so nice to have a fucking number to look at and be able to see, did I get stronger? And that's something that I really have always enjoyed about powerlifting. It's very refreshing when I spend so much of my time in the bodybuilding world. So I still enjoy that objectivity with powerlifting. And that's another reason why I want to continue to do it for a little bit longer. The immediate plan right after the meet was to lose about 15 pounds, really bring up my aerobic capacity and cardiorespiratory fitness, and prepare for skateboard camp, adult skateboard camp at the end of August. So that was a pretty cool process. I'll go over that in an upcoming video, but I was able to lose that weight in a pretty short span. So there's some cool things that happen both physiologically and psychologically with that I'll share. And we'll just go over what that process looked like. After that, going into more of a maintenance phase as a bridge, and then getting into a really aggressive hypertrophy cycle. So I'll be sharing all that stuff as we go along. So thank you for coming along the journey here thus far. Hopefully this video was somewhat helpful for you. If you have any questions, comments, anything, put them below. And look forward to taking you along the next phase of the journey.